presenting a crash course on Major League Soccer. Having grown up in the Middle East, soccer was a very significant part of my upbringing. Growing up, I was up to date with every transfer, every match, and almost everything to do with the Spanish, French, and English league. However, I've never gotten the chance to get informed on the US league, which is the MLS. Firstly, I thought it'd be important to share some background information about the league and the sport in general that might be useful to know. A soccer game is a 90-minute match. In soccer, each team is usually split between defenders, midfielders, and forwards. Furthermore, since I'll be using the term throughout my analysis, a lineup represents which players play for a given game, which can be seen here. The MLS is a relatively new league that has only been around since 1993. It's divided between a West and an East conference, and because it's new, there are still teams being added till today. For my project, I use a data set that's specific to the 2020 season and their league standings, and I use a data set on the players for each team over the course of the MLS's existence. The first thing I wanted to examine is the league standing of the previous season in 2020. Over here we have the East Conference, and we can see the New York and Atlanta are both on top of the league, with New York coming in first. And for the West Conference, we have the Los Angeles FC and then Seattle in second. After having examined the standings, I wanted to see how the distribution of wins, losses, and draws for each respective conference would look like. As we can see, there isn't an exact correlation with draws, but we see that the wins go from the highest in the left and the lowest in the right, and the opposite goes for the losses. For the West Conference, we see a similar trend, which is expected since we'd expect the best teams to win the most. After having a better understanding of the teams in the recent year, I jumped into analyzing how that correlated to a team's performance throughout the existence of the MLS. Since history of a team is a large part of soccer, as it is for other sports. I wanted to generate an understanding of how good the players are in each team in the MLS. I made a bar plot of the average number of games played per player in each team and colored it by the average number of goals scored per player for each team. As you can see, the average number of goals tend to go from the highest from the left to the right, which is quite interesting since the highest number of game played on average per player per team is also the same trend. By comparing the average number of goals for each player with the average number of games each player in the team played, we not only get an understanding of how many goals the average player scores, but we also develop an understanding of how constant a team's lineup is. When the average game played per player of a team is low, as we can see on the right of the graph, it probably means that the team tends to not have the same people that play every game, meaning there's more turnaround and less stability in which players play, which would be the opposite for a team that has a high average games played per player. It also seems as though the teams that have a lower average games played per player are the newer teams and the more developing teams. I did the same thing for average assists per player, and we see the same trends that go from the highest number of assists to the lower number of assists to the right based on the average number of games played. Furthermore, after examining the recent standings of each team and how the players of each team have performed over the course of the league, I thought it'd be beneficial to my understanding to see how each position in the league correlates to one another. The first thing I did is I used goals versus positions to see how they correlated. As we can see here, the forwards tend to have the most goals, as can be seen in the blue dots. And then when I did the same thing for assists, it seems as though the midfielders are taking up the higher parts of the dot plot, which would make sense because usually it's the midfielders who assist. After seeing how there seems to be a correlation between the most goals scored and the players being forwards and assists and the players being midfielders, I decided to create a cluster plot to see how players are grouped by position based on indicators such as goals scored, games played, goals and assists, goals per 90 minute, and assists per 90 minute because those are more objective standards. As we can see here, it does seem like there is some sort of clustering between forwards, midfielders, defensive midfields, as can be seen by the colors in the clustering graph. Moving forward, it seems as though in both conferences, the same teams that have succeeded recently in 2020 have been doing quite well during the entirety of the MLS's existence. Furthermore, it seems that based on the player's position, there tends to be clustering in the stats that they achieve in games, as we saw in the cluster graph and the dot plots. Finally, some next steps would be, rather than evaluating players over the course of the MLS's existence, I could do so on a year-to-year basis to see how it fluctuates. Similarly, I could do so for each team to see whether the teams that are doing well have always been doing well, whether there was fluctuation in their performance. By doing so, I could see how well clubs performed when they first joined the league and how they're performing now, to see whether the new clubs who have just joined will witness the same type of learning curve. Thank you very much.